Welcome to Wednesday Wanderings. My name is Mark Long, rector of the parish of St Andrew in Newlands, Cape Town. I missed wandering with you last week due to extended meetings that I was involved in, and I will miss being with you next week as I'm wandering off on a few days' leave. But it's good to be with you today, and I look forward to joining you again in 2 weeks' time. Today we celebrate Robert Gray in our church liturgical cycle. And wonderful to just be thankful for some of the really hard work he put in place in putting the foundations of the Anglican Church in Southern Africa in place. He was also the first Archbishop of Cape Town. But that aside, one of our readings for today comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, from verse 38 through to 44. I encourage you to read that separately. But it's a story I'm sure you know well of Jesus going to spend the evening at Simon Peter's home, healing his mother-in-law, and subsequently that news spread like wildfire and the village arrived with all those who were struggling with sickness, evil and other things. And Jesus, it says, lays his hand on each one of them and drives out evil. And although they recognize him and proclaim him as Messiah, he shuts them up at that point. What's interesting about the reading, of course, is that all happens. And it sounds like Jesus ministers late into the night. And then early in the morning, he's up and off into the hills before anybody's looking for him. And the various gospel accounts are slightly different. Here in Luke, we hear that the crowds go and find him in the hills. I think it's Mark's gospel where we hear that the disciples are overwhelmed by the crowds returning in the morning and go searching for Jesus. But I think there are a few things here. One of them is just around self-care. Jesus was clearly always generous when there was need around him and happy to reach out and happy to touch people's lives. But he would take time too to just get away, to renew particularly the relationship that he had with God the Father, and to just immerse himself in that. And that's where the crowds find him. And again, interestingly, Jesus doesn't just say, well, let's spend the day together. He says, I've given you a whole lot. I've been generous with God's love and healing. We've dealt with a whole lot of evil in your communities and lives. And it's now time to move on. And he goes with his disciples off to neighboring villages just to share something of the love of God and the hope that Jesus just naturally exuded with others. And it struck me that our human nature is such that when we find something, the tendency is to hold it because we're sure that if we give it away or share it, it's going to disappear and we're going to lose it. But the nature of the Christian gospel is that the variety of resources God gives us, when we are willing to share those resources, when we're willing to let go of them and not hold them and constrict them to the center of our lives, that God amazingly works in and through them. We've just spent 6 weeks dealing with John chapter 6 in our Sunday readings. And that began with the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And amazingly, it's those few loaves and few fish that in the breaking of those and the sharing of those, that there just is this miraculous feeding. That would never have happened if the young boy had not allowed one of the disciples to see that he had the loaves and fish. If he had said, no, I'm going to keep this loaf here, it would never have been shared out. The sense of people's hunger being not only met but satisfied would never have happened. But that young boy took that resource, that bread, and said, in fact, gave it away. He said, here it is. And of course, Jesus takes that gift of bread and fish and he breaks it. And what strikes me about that is that it is only in the breaking of that bread that it can be shared. And so whether it's bread, whether it's fish, whether it's other material possessions, or even just the kind of gifts and abilities and skills that we have, if we hold them here, they never really become useful, either to ourselves or to others. But it's in being willing to say, particularly to God, here is the gift, or here is the skill, the ability, the resource And I want to gift it, that it may be used for others. It's been gifted to us by God, of course, and we want to give it back. And the struggle, of course, is to see, and for that young boy would have been to see Jesus take this whole loaf and break it. Although that would have been natural, because that's what we do with bread. You and I probably get out the bread knife and saw away at it. But unless you've been to Woolworths or Pick and Pay or something and bought pre-sliced bread. But that bread has to be broken in some form in order to be given out. And my challenge to each of us today, no matter where we are, is to just think a little on two levels. One, in terms of this reading, what are the boundaries that we have in our lives? What is the purpose of those boundaries? Sometimes those boundaries are to protect us at the expense of relationship. But other times those boundaries, and in a good space, those boundaries are there to actually just allow us to withdraw for a while, just to be re-resourced, that when we step forward, we have something more to give. Every time Jesus comes back from his time in the hills, every time he comes back down the mountain, he's got something to give to the crowds that are waiting. And that for us, no matter what the context of our lives, if we don't step back, we cannot step forward again. And then just to think about the breadth of resources that we have in these COVID times, where the needs around us are just so huge, and our own needs may be massive. But to have the courage of that young boy just to say, I have a couple of loaves, I have a few fish, here they are, use them. And to trust that as we see those gifts broken, that in the breaking, they become shareable. And in the sharing, they give life, they give energy, they enable life and ministry to happen. And so may myself, as much as you, but may you too, know something of that deep depth of God's love and provision. And may we not be afraid, and I speak very specifically to myself here, and that's partly why I'm going away next week. Let us not be afraid to take time out and to just find time for recreation, perhaps for a bit of extra space for prayer and reflection. And just to know that in that space, God is active, and that as we step back from that space, God will continue to be active. And hopefully as we come back from times of reflection and time out, that God can use us even more fully and more powerfully in the places that he's put us.